They kicked my briefcase across the marble, called me out loud in front of everybody like I'd crawled out of a Section 8 complex, and then one of them reached and grabbed my arm so hard it left a mark. And for the record, yeah, that happened. My name is Governor Elaine Carter, and I sat on a wooden bench in Brookfield City Hall with my tablet open, acting like a citizen, because I wanted to know what happens to people who don't get the luxury of a title. 3 sentences to set you up. You'll see why I didn't bring security, and you'll see why this shook a town. I had come early for an 11:30 facility inspection with Mayor Laura Benson. No press, no motorcade, just a navy suit, a leather portfolio, and a plan show up unannounced, be anonymous. See if the policies I'd fought for were actually in the bones of the place, or just on letterhead. I'd signed accountability bills that put teeth into oversight, mandatory bias training, a statewide complaints database, all that. It looked good on paper, but paper doesn't tell you how someone sees you when they think you're nothing. Brookfield, City Hall smelled like lemon cleaner and old money sunlight pooling on the floor like a spotlight. People paying permits, arguing property taxes, flipping pages. I sat by the security desk, the kind of quiet you only get in government buildings before the day fully wakes, and I watched. Miguel Santos, the security guard at the metal detectors, nodded when I came in. Gentlemanly, respectful, and I thought, good, this is the baseline. The digital sign even scrolled, "Welcome Governor Elaine Carter. Facility inspection 11:30 a.m." No one looked up. I liked that. Then they walked in 2 uniform spoots that made statements on marble. One of them looked like he owned that building before it was built. Chest out, jaw set, sunglasses clipped to his uniform, and the other followed like a boy trying to learn how to be mean. The first one, Mark Dalton, zeroed in on me the way a hawk zeroes in on a rabbit. A look I know too well if you're a person of color in public space, suspicion wrapped in entitlement. "Ma'am, what are you doing here?" he said loud enough that a sentence in his voice cut the whole lobby in half. "Waiting for an appointment," I said, calm, like I was reading an architectural plan and not about to be a spectacle. He kicked my briefcase. Papers spilled. A lawyer nearby stopped mid-sentence. Phones came up. The partner, Ethan Cole, snickered like he'd seen a prank, and the lobby contracted around us. Mark moved closer, invasive and deliberate. "Show me some ID," he barked. I reached for my leather wallet. "Hands where I can see them," he snapped, and that's when his hand went to his holster. People ducked behind pillars. My heart beat steady. Years in public life teach you to keep your face even when your blood is boiling. And I told him, "Officer, I'm simply getting my identification the way you asked." He snatched the card from my hand like it was a lie. It had the state seal embossed letters, my photo, and the word "Governor" across the top. He didn't read it. He scanned it like a man who already knew what he wanted to see. "Everybody's got ID," he muttered and tossed it back onto the bench. Miguel moved to do what a decent human being would do. Check the log, verify the appointment. Dalton told him to back off. "Listen, there is a sound worse than a slap, the sudden silence after someone crosses a line." The old man at the counter cleared his throat. The mother at the permit window leaned forward. The woman on the second floor, who later identified herself as assistant city clerk, pulled out her phone. I watched Mark unzip my briefcase without probable cause and dump my notes on the bench like they were trash. Architecture drawings, budget spreadsheets with my office letterhead, a leather planner stamped, "Office of the Governor." He didn't look. He saw a black woman. He saw a threat. "You taking all that I asked low. We're conducting a search," Dalton said, as if that made it legal. He tossed my phone back in, cracked the screen. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my security detail 2 blocks away. "Everything okay?" I'd typed back. "Perfect. Stay there. They hate it when I do this. They hate that I want to see what happens when there's no flag to wave, no badge of power to brandish. That's the point." When I asked him if I was being detained, he said, "Yeah, you're being detained for suspicious behavior." Suspicious of what? Sitting. Wearing a suit, breathing. Then he tightened his grip and said we could take a little trip downtown. On what charge, I asked. "We'll figure that out," he said, and at that precise second, the room stopped being a lobby and started being evidence. Then someone older, Sergeant Randall Hayes, came through the door and looked at the mess like a man catching a joke he shouldn't have told. He stepped closer, took the ID off the bench, read it like it was foreign language, and said, "That's Governor Elaine Carter." Mark's face lost its color. Phones dropped lower, the murmurs swelled. You could feel the air change. It went from permission to perform violence to the sudden realization that someone had tried to drag power out into the sunlight and failed. "Ma'am, I apologize," Mark stammered like those two words could stitch back dignity. But apologies aren't about stitches. They're about whether you meant it. His apology felt like a reaction, not remorse. The city mayor, Laura Benson, appeared in heels that sounded like punctuation, and she looked at the red marks on my wrist where Dalton had held me at the scattered papers at the cracked screen. She didn't need the ID, she had eyes. Chief Randall Hayes called it in. Not as a caution, but as a crisis. My staff from the state office showed up 2 minutes later. The state police entered, and the Department of Justice hooked in hours after. Someone from the Civil Rights Division said my name into a radio, and suddenly this was not about me. It was about the pattern. Dalton had 17 complaints quietly filed against him for excessive force and racialized interactions. 17. Filed, ignored, archived. It was a dossier on a habit, not a mistake. Within days, federal agents were there with subpoenas pulling records that someone had hoped would stay buried. The local newspaper ran the footage from every angle. The phones that filmed it made one man's daily cruelty global in a weekend. Some of the officers were suspended, the chief had to answer to the state, and Dalton and his partner were indicted on civil rights violations. In the trial that followed, texts came out that read like a manual for bias videos of stops and searches that made your stomach sink, and an admission from the partner who finally said, "I didn't know. I just followed along." I testified. I told the jury how the room felt to me, how a public space should have been ordinary, and how it became a place where my right to be there had to be proven. I told them I came because laws mean nothing unless they live in the day-to-day. The jury took 4 hours to decide. Guilty on every count. Dalton received years in prison. The partner got a reduced sentence for full cooperation. The town had to rebuild trust under a federal consent decree. New oversight mandatory body cameras that couldn't be deactivated, trainings that had teeth instead of brochures. But the victory wasn't just the verdict. It was the grown-up conversation that followed. Brookfield didn't just fire a couple officers. It reevaluated how complaints get handled, who sits on oversight boards, how civilian reports are logged and followed. Sergeant Hayes became the face of reform inside the department. He stepped up, testified, and helped design new training. Miguel, the security guard, got a commendation and was finally seen for the decent person he was. Some folks left, some folks changed, and the community started to reshape itself. And yet, and this is important, a courtroom win doesn't erase the everyday. The teenager pulled over for suspicious driving last month still remembers sitting on a curb with a badge in their face. The nurse who had her car searched still has a police report that bears a stamp of humiliation. Systems bend toward justice when people push. They don't magically fix themselves because one bad apple is punished. That's why I used my power to pass the Carter Accountability Act. Mandatory body cams, a statewide tracking system for complaints, civilian oversight with subpoena power, and why I still show up unannounced. So here's the part I want you to sit with when you see a person who looks out of place. In a lobby, at a store, on a street, what do you do? Do you assume threat, or do you assume humanity? When someone in a position of power says, "Trust us who watches the watchers." Because if dignity is only granted with credentials, then most of us will live beneath the threshold of respect. I'm not telling you to hate cops, I'm telling you to demand accountability, to make sure that authority comes with responsibility. And if you've ever been judged by how you look, if you've ever been told you didn't belong, tell that story. If you saw something and did nothing, consider what silence cost someone else. Record it, report it. Remind people that power is not permission to dehumanize. Call to action. Not because I want clicks, but because I want change, tell me in the comments. Have you seen someone treated like they didn't belong? Have you ever been that person? What should we do differently? Share this video if you believe dignity isn't earned by title, and if you're brave enough, tell your story below. Debate me, call me naive, argue the fine points, but don't pretend this isn't happening. If we want a system that actually protects everyone, it starts with the small acts of accountability, and with people watching recording and refusing to let dignity be conditional. If you stayed to the end, thank you. And if this hit a nerve, share it. Because real change doesn't come from a courtroom alone. It comes from a crowd that refuses to look away.